Hey, ladies and gents, it's Zen back. We're doing supply and demand. I haven't been feeling very well, uh, allergies and stuff, so I haven't been on for a little bit. So just work with me here. If you hear me coughing, yeah, I'm having a rough time right now. So we're talking about supply and demand. I did a video on the trading thing, and it was kind of a little bit more of a beginner's level type stuff. So the actual supply and demand works on the concept of each individual factory. For example, this factory right here, this area in space with these factories in it, create essentially a supply and demand out to about 25 sectors. So we're at 66 here, 41 here. So about 25 this way, and then I think like 17 or 18 this way. It creates a nice big circle of supply and demand around it. However, the ideal location, for example, in this situation, if I wanted to build um, coal, which is needed in this general area, is 24.7%. The actual demand only extends out roughly 12 systems over. After the 12 systems, you get out to 25, it starts to decline quite a bit. So you really want to be, if you're, for example, if I want to find a coal mine right here, I want to be within this under 12 systems in this general area. And for example, here's 3 asteroids right here. I could put a coal, platinum, and gold right there and still get my plus 23, 25%. I go out past the 12 system, 12 and a half system roughly. Out here, I'm going to start losing money. I'll still get above base price, but it's not going to be 20, 30%. It's going to be like 10 or 12. And for example, we're just going to do here, so 54, we'll enter the coordinates, that's the 12 out. Now, our coal was at 24.7. And we're going to jump out here, and I'll give you an idea exactly how the supply and demand works. The further you move away from that point of what you're doing. So now the coal is 21.2%. So we've lost about 3% by just moving out those 12. If we jump out to the 25, we're still going to have the supply and demand from the supply and demand from those factories, but it's once again, it prefers the closer you are to the factory, the more you're going to make. Coal is now down to 13.2%. And this just continues on out. We can jump out past the 25 and you'll see a huge just an absolute huge drop in demand. And we're out. Yep, see, nothing. So the supply and demand is something you have to be watching out. And once again, this has to do entirely with exceptional, exotic, and legendary. Those are the 3 systems, high-tech trading systems, that are going to let you be able to do this. But it's something to remember when you're doing the supply and demand, is making sure you are staying within that roughly 12 system from wherever you're looking at your trading system, staying within that 12 here. Now there is another way of doing this without having to use for example, the trading system. For example, here we're going to look up processors. Oops. Processors. So that processors. Why is that so far off? So there's one there. But this area here, for example, since I'm typed in essentially processors, they're going to show me where the processor factories are at. Where these processor factories are at, right there's a pretty good example. There's 5 or 6 right here. There's going to be a very low demand for processors in the area. You can very easily jump into that sector, pick up processors super cheap, and then simply by looking at your map and seeing where you're not seeing processors. For example, this region of space right here has no processor factories at all. Fairly quick jump from here by your processors. Just looking at the global map, or not the global map, the galaxy map, you can see that this would be a good place to buy processors. Just a simple little trick if you're looking to do it that way, not even using the trading system, if you have everything mapped out, of course. Now we're going to jump over here. Now, not only do you want to use this for your own setting up mines, but your own factories as well. We are going to go to yeah, we're going to jump into one of my own factories. This is a processor factory here. And using the supply and demand, but the supply and demand was critical to choosing where I built this processor factory. So we're going to jump in here, and you're going to see, since I'm using MPCs to supply this factory, microchips, platinum, and gold are all negative 6% lower, 11% lower, and 21% lower. The only high stuff I'm paying for is the semiconductors, which are relatively cheap anyway. Same way with copper, relatively cheap. But when you're wanting to build these kind of factories, these are more advanced factories, you got to be conscious that when you're looking at your supply and demand, that these numbers, as many of these numbers possible, to be under the negative numbers. Since I'm a plus 30% here, I'm making quite a bit more, since the average cost for a processor is only 78. I'm getting 12,236 per processor. The average cost for a processor is 7,858. So this is kind of a gold mine right here, literally. Being able to, buying microchips super cheap, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I've spent 183 million. I've made 300. So my profit is 108, almost 190 million on this station, just by paying attention to my supply and demand. When I put this station here, microchips are cheap, platinum gold was cheap, copper's a little more expensive, and semiconductor, which is the cheapest of them all, is up 21%. Not a big deal. And I can also change that by factoring in the base price for this factory. This has nothing to do with the base price of the local area. This is just what I'm going to sell them for. So I can up it an extra 4%. And you kind of want to pay attention when you're doing that, when you're looking at, for example, the actual demand or the actual supply of it. So it's a really low supply of processors here. So at 27, the price difference is 27.3% difference, but the actual supply is really low, because semiconductors are extremely high because there is no supply in the general area, or plastics. Fusion cores might be my next one that I put in here, because there's absolutely no supply for it. Yeah, so it's juggling. You just got to pay attention to the supply and demand as much as possible when you're building your stations. It sure helps out, at least in the passive money making. So hopefully that helps you guys out a little bit more about how this whole supply and demand thing works. So with that said, you guys have a good night, and we'll talk to you later.